Hello and welcome to yet another edition of International Relations with Professor Pushpesh Pant. And this time, the program we have curated for you has three very interesting topics. Uh, One of them totally unprecedented. For the first time in history of United States, an ex-president has been arraigned and indicted for criminal offenses, and he's being put to trial. Now, this is something which people had been waiting that Trump had ridden roughshod over the rule of law when he was the president, and people thought that would be much graver charges he would have to face about trying to indulge in a coup to take over power, saying that the election had been stolen from him. But what he's being tried for is a far lesser charge of bribing a porn star whose services he had availed of during the election campaign. So the charge is probably that this bribe to keep her mouth shut was an irregularity of laws which govern election finances, but we'll come to that later because people have been speculating in past what would happen if Trump comes back as a candidate of the grand old party in 2024 and comes back much worse. Some people think as the president of the United States, because his first tenure had turned the world topsy-turvy. Will he do greater damage than like the bull in the china shop? The second time he comes, will he settle scores? How would the world respond to him? The world has also changed since he was the president of the United States. But then nobody can say that in politics everything is possible, and he still has a good support base there. So there's one incident which we shall discuss with you. This is an issue which some may think has no connect with India, but it has a very interesting connect in India also, because there are lots of politicians at the center in different parties or in the states are also accused of criminal backgrounds, criminal activities. They have never been held to in a dock, but sometimes the charges are dropped, sometimes the trials take too long, sometimes they are also convicted, and when they are convicted there are disqualifications that follow. And the latest case this time has been Rahul Gandhi's being unseated from the parliament for some slanderous statements he made, but we shall come to that later. So there are points of comparison that how in a democracy where there is a separation of powers, judiciary, if it is really independent, can exercise control over even the highest member of the executive. Nobody is immune from the rule of law. But this is US, where the federal system and the separation of power is sacrosanct. India's case is slightly different, but these points are interesting to keep in mind. There have been similar cases of third world leaders being brought to trial, like the president of the South Africa, when President Zuma was manipulated by the Gupta brothers of Indian origin, and he was charged with great corruption. His successor has been charged with corruption. But normally what happens is that even if the grave charges are put against these leaders, there is a whitewash, there is an air spraying. The judicial process doesn't actually run its own course. The case is very different in authoritarian regimes, whether we are talking of Russia or China or other dictatorships or other unconstitutional monarchies. But we shall leave it at that. We shall discuss this later. The second thing which we wish to discuss with you is the cracks which are appearing in the European policy towards China. President Macron recently visited China. He made some statements there which alerted his allies in the European Union. They thought that he was breaking ranks. President Macron has long been talking of strategic autonomy of France and not letting NATO, whom he called once in the first term of his reign, as brain-dead organization. So, but NATO has assumed great importance after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and there has been this simmering of discontent within the members of NATO. Those at the front line wants NATO to be more active. Those who are a little more removed think that the burden of NATO trying to take on Russian aggression on behalf of Ukraine, a non-member, is something which they are not prepared to pay. Certain ultra-conservative members of the Republican Party in the United States have also mentioned that they are not in favor of Ukraine being given aid for an indefinite, unlimited length of time. So there is this, are the Germany and France, two major countries in European Union, breaking ranks? Is there a disagreement? How it is going to impact on America and America's relationship with European Union is an important issue. There also has been discussion in recent past that the Americans have been trying to build up a strategic relationship on a firmer foundation than their alliance with the European Union, whom President Biden had earlier said that they should be paying for their own security. They could look forward to America bankrolling their security preparations. But then the Americans have been talking in terms of the Anglosphere. And Anglosphere is something like AUKUS, which is not only English-speaking people, it is people who are white in race, are Christians, and speak English language, and they are a separate category altogether from Canada, United States, United Kingdom, to Australia, New Zealand. New Zealand is ancillary, but Australia is very much there. So if we keep that in mind, this crack in European Union's policy towards China, particularly when China is on a path of restoration of its economy post-COVID trauma, is interesting what is going to happen. It also has warning bells ringing elsewhere in the world capitals, because what is happening is the war in Ukraine has brought China and Russia together, and it has brought other allies together like Iran, like Pakistan. Turkey plays a very tightrope balancing act, but all this is taking us into a territory that if Macron signals that France is going to follow a different policy vis-a-vis China, he has tried to backtrack a little, but the damage has been done. We shall have a look at this also. And the third issue is even more interesting. US President Biden undertook a tour of Ireland and spent a lot of time there. Now, it is well known that he belongs to a family of Irish origins, and this is also towards the end of his first term in office. Almost, if he is not going to contest the elections, there has been speculation: he's much too old. Is he medically fit enough to discharge responsibilities on this high-tension job for the next 4 years? He becomes very emotional. At times he has problems walking. At times he misunderstands. At times he doesn't see what is next to him. But this is not there at all. Once he goes to Ireland, there has been a recognition that the headlines follow wherever the US president goes, that Ireland has been on boil again. It is 25 years ago, a Good Friday Agreement was reached. And this is just about the anniversary when the US president toured Ireland. There has been simmering of discontent in Ireland ever since the Brexit was announced, because Brexit made a backward stop barrier which would affect the trade of Northern Ireland with the Irish Republic. It would drive the wedge deeper, separate them. There also have been a new generation resurgence of the members of Irish Republican Army who do not seem to abide by what was agreed 25 years ago by their ancestors, that the two Irelands, divided by religion, divided by politics, divided by bitter historical memories, should live in peace and give up violence. So this was incorporation of Sinn Féin and IRA into regular electoral politics in Ireland was taken for granted for almost 25 years. But Brexit put a big question mark to all that, because if the economy was going to be threatened by Brexit, would the relationship between the two riven apart or parts of Ireland would survive, and would this put pressures on the unity of the United Kingdom? There have been simmerings of discontent in Scotland as well, where there is a demand for referendum to decide separation from the United Kingdom. So in this context, it is a very interesting situation. What was the US president trying to do? Was he trying to pour oil on boiling waters? Or was he trying to indicate that United Kingdom, Rishi Sunak or no Rishi Sunak, still depends on Big Brother across the Atlantic to help them out in their moment of need? Maybe USA cannot undo all the damage which has been done by Brexit, but probably it can apply a healing touch and buy a respite for them, for the United Kingdom and the Prime Minister, to probably have a new initiative in Ireland. This is all we will discuss with you at length. And again, some of you might wonder, where is the Indian connection? The Indian connection is that India, without being white in skin, without being majority Christian, thinks that it belongs very much to the Anglosphere because of ties with the United Kingdom, because of the legacy of the legal system, educational system, and our natural affinity with a form of democracy which is a mixture of the Westminster model and the American model. So we have a system of governance, system of education, usage in language, which brings us closer to the Western world. Western world meaning the America and the United Kingdom. We also have close ties with the European Union, some countries in Europe. But the question these days that is being asked is post-Russian invasion of Ukraine, are we going to balance our relationship with China? Is going to be a delicate balancing act because China is the greatest threat which India faces to its national security, also to its economic dependence on China. The trade imbalance is very, very a grievous matter for Indian governments to think. So would we like to look at developments closely which are happening in the Anglosphere? And part of that is Ireland. So this is what we shall do. And I think let's get ahead right away. Let's begin with Trump's arrested and faces criminal charges. Now, on March 30th, 2023, Trump became historically the first president of the United States, ex-president who had been the president to 2017 to 2021, was indicted by a Manhattan grand jury for his alleged role in a scandal, as we shared with you earlier, paying hush money to payments to a porn star. Now, this is not some would say this is a very personal kind of a charge which has been brought against him. But the whole issue is that can the president claim or an ex-president claim on grounds of privacy or personal infringement of his relationships total immunity from things which are grossly illegal. Now, certain words may confuse a general reader. What is an indictment? What is an arraignment? Now, these things simply in Indian terms means that a charge sheet has been filed. Prima facie, it has been found that the charges have substance. And when the trial takes place, the accused has to submit himself to the court. And that is a bit humiliating because normally a person is handcuffed, photographed, his mugshot is taken, thumbprints are taken. He submits to the jurisdiction of a court and stands there like any other ordinary accused. An accused, let's remember, is not a convict. He may still be absolved, freed, etc. The second thing which is important to understand about American legal system is that offenses of this kind go to before a grand jury. And the accused is tried by a jury, and a jury trial is something which is alien to Indian legal system. So this is what is the drama is going to unfold. So Trump was making a lot of bullying statements, blustering against the advice of his lawyers that he's being framed. They are going to make him a scapegoat. They want to keep him out of the next elections. Now, the interesting part is this, that whatever happens, whether he's convicted or is declared innocent and acquitted, the polarization of pro-Trump, ultra-right members of the Republican Party is going to take place in any case. The white supremacists, the gun right people, the evangelist Christians, those who are against LGBT community, all of them would get as much mileage out of this polarization as some people say polarization of the communal kind is benefiting both the ultra-nationalist Hindu party and the minority appeasing parties at the same time in the country. So keep that in mind, that a judicial trial of an important political personality has impact on electoral politics and necessarily spills over into foreign policy and diplomacy. While the proper way of describing what is happening is misdemeanor. Now, misdemeanor and felony, again, are words used in the context of American legal system. A misdemeanor is a much lesser offense. It is not a cognizable offense under normal circumstances. And the rough comparison would be a cognizable, serious, heinous offense and a non-cognizable, compoundable, lesser offense in Indian context. But it does, again, infringe. If it infringes the campaign finance rules, then it is a major flaw, and it might end up in Trump being projected as a person unfit to recontest elections next time, or present himself as a candidate, and the party would not like to get the burden of his candidacy in the next elections. Neither the indictment nor any resulting conviction will disqualify President automatically. So the comparisons with Rahul's case, comparison with the MP from the Lakshadweep are not very apt here. But please remember that there have been convictions for a certain term in India which have disqualified people like chief ministers like Lalu Yadav, and the trial goes on. And one long conviction, it happened to the chief minister of Haryana. So if on a corruption charge in India, a politician gets a certain number of years as punishment, he is automatically disqualified. He might be convicted for a lesser number of years in jail, but if the punishment carries 2 years, automatically his membership of the House is terminated, as happened in Rahul Gandhi's case. So this is something which you must keep in mind. There are comparisons, but they are not always exactly one-to-one comparisons. As we said, neither indictment nor conviction will rule out, would disqualify Trump. But as the Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson, Mr. Anindam Bagchi, said, the Ministry of External Affairs has noted the charging of framing of charges of the ex-president of the United States, but for falsifying business records, for trying to bribe a porn star, but says it's a matter for the American institutions, American citizens, American voters, and American public to decide. It also, at the same time, the spokesperson of the Ministry of External Affairs expresses strong displeasure at other countries like Germany pointing fingers at India, commenting on Indian developments, about whether it's about atrocities against minorities, suppression of fundamental rights, etc. Government of India's firm position is ably projected by its diplomats, particularly what has been described as the razor-sharp Foreign Minister Dr. Jaishankar, that internal affairs of a state should not be commented upon by any state outside their borders, and they should resist the temptation to do so. It is a mutual respect for the sovereignty of the nations. The remarks which Germany's made was about the disqualification of Congress leader Rahul Gandhi from the parliament, and it said that they're watching it with close concern. So this is what had landed Rahul Gandhi into greater trouble. People said that he had carried a domestic partisan fight outside to foreign lands. He shouldn't have done that. Now, similarly, some kind of a comparison to this is there when we go to cracks in Europe's China policy. Now, nobody would say that President Macron, as a head of the state of a independent, sovereign, substantial country in Europe, which has had close ties with China before, should not follow an independent policy about China. But the manner you do that, do you let your allies know first what you are going to do, or you would like to surprise them, put them on the back foot? He had taken the precaution of asking Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, to accompany him in the first week of April. But the point is, the Chinese are very clever people. They treated a French president and the president of the European Union protocol-wise differently. So President Macron had longer sessions one-to-one with President Xi Jinping, and Ursula von der Leyen was only around for a part of this time and at a lower protocol status. The visit was conducted in the backdrop of the European Council President's statement. They needed to de-risk, not decouple the relationship with China. Now, the de-risk was that ever since COVID, it was quite clear that the supply chains were disrupted and the economic well-being of Europe was practically mortgaged to this equipment coming, supply chain coming, chips coming from China, and this over-dependence should be done. It did not mean that you disengage yourself from China totally. Even President Trump, who had practically declared trade war on China, had made it clear that he was not arguing for disengagement. He was not advocating disengagement, but he was only trying to have a balanced relationship with China. Now, of course, there was a great difference between what he said and what he did. But when Macron went there, Macron again had been talking that we should not be followers of US in its policy towards Taiwan, and we are not necessarily as concerned about the Russian aggression, not as concerned about Chinese aggression in Taiwan, as they are concerned about Russian aggression in Ukraine, because Ukraine is next door, part of Europe. Taiwan is not. Now, once you say this, The only winner after these visits seems to be Xi Jinping, because de-risking was read as a shorthand for weaning Europe off Chinese supplies, but over fears of technology theft, strengthening Chinese military-industrial complex, these were the American concerns. These concerns, surely Macron made very clear, or his statements made the world to understand, are not shared by France. So France would like to have, as a manifestation of its strategic autonomy, a relationship with China, which doesn't always follow in America's footsteps. This obviously is bringing to surface cracks in Europe's China policy. What President Macron said, the great risk Europe faces is that it gets caught up in crises that are not ours, which prevents it from building its strategic autonomy. It warned that Europe, if it did not watch out, could become a vessel in US-China conflict over Taiwan. He went beyond others as he advocated strategic autonomy, and probably has his visions of a France-led Europe as a third superpower. Xi Jinping and Chinese Communist Party enthusiastically welcomed these statements, endorses his words, but both European leaders, however, did discuss the issue of stability in the Taiwan Strait with President Xi. But this was almost as an aside. He did mention Taiwan, expressed Europe's concern about it, but at the same time, he was saying he was distancing himself with the American position. Xi responded by saying that anyone who thought that they could influence Beijing on Taiwan was deluded. Macron appears to agree with that statement. Europeans cannot resolve the crisis in Ukraine. How can we credibly do so in Taiwan? Now, this is what the French perspective is. The Americans have always thought that they can solve any crisis anywhere. What makes the Taiwan issue particularly fraught is that even the United States itself recognized Taiwan as a part of China. It's a one-China policy agrees to, so does India. So, but then this is the problem with dealing with China. China wants to maintain a difference in policy when it wants to have a nuanced conduct with people outside. Others do not have the same luxury. China can go back on the nuanced stand and say, no, this is part of our territory, inalienable part of our territory. And it is not a war against a foreign country which we are doing. We are reclaiming something which belongs to us, which always belonged to us, was unlawfully, unrightly taken away from us. That's what happened to Hong Kong. The European Union has found it notoriously difficult to forge a consolidated approach to the world's second largest economy, that is China, world's largest producer, almost 95-96% of the rare earths, making pharmaceutical intermediaries, a largest producer between Taiwan and China. They probably have the monopoly of the market of the chips, advanced integrated circuits. So all this makes America see China as a systemic rival, but this is not how the Europeans view it. This takes us to the conclusion that maybe Europe actually has a haphazard foreign policy. There are states which are on the front line, like Poland, where the Polish Prime Minister says that some Western leaders dream of cooperation with everybody. Some Western leaders, he meant Macron, cooperation with Russia, some in the Far East without naming China. After Macron's trip, the German foreign minister also said during her visit to China that any attempt by China to control Taiwan would be unacceptable and would have serious repercussions in Europe. Of course, it will have serious repercussions on Europe. But is China going to take this as a warning? Take this as a serious warning? Or will China think that this is only the Germans trying to damage control what has been done by Macron to keep the European unity together? All this is in a departure from the policies of a German former Chancellor Angela Merkel. Olaf Scholz's government is developing a new China strategy to reduce Germany's dependence on Asia's economic superpower. France may do lip service to this concept, but in reality may not necessarily follow this path. These events reveal a deep Franco-German disunity on policy toward China, which could potentially harm the entire EU. Now, what harms or benefits EU is not India's headache, but what is of concern to India is that India has a very adversarial, inimical almost relationship with China. China trespasses on its territory. China does salami slicing to neighbors' territories where borders are shared and adjacent. China has a hostile posture towards India, whether it is South China Sea, whether it's the Indian Ocean, whether it is giving India nuclear a seat in the nuclear table, or structural reforms in the United Nations. It thinks that India has followed the camp of the Americans and repeatedly said so. Now, whether it's Arunachal Pradesh, the visit of our Home Minister, the visit of Dalai Lama, all those statements are there. How do we, despite this, we have a burgeoning trade imbalance with People's Republic of China. Can we try to, we always thought that we would play the European card or the American card post their problems with China, but we haven't really succeeded in it. So how do we manage our relationship with both France and Germany, valued partners, rest of European Union, and our tensions in our relationship with China is the issue which India will have to deal with. This brings us to Ireland on the Boyle and President Biden's visit. President Biden returned to Ireland past week, in search of his roots and to ease tensions surrounding long lingering fallouts. Now, he doesn't have to really search for his roots. There have been other presidents in America, like the Kennedys, who have had roots in Ireland. There have been poets, writers, painters, scientists who have had close ties with Ireland. The Americans have a strong Republican nature, and they have sympathized with the fight of the Irish Republicans against the British colonial regime earlier also. But this issue has become more important after Brexit, because after Brexit, the harmonious relationship between the two partitioned bits of Ireland, the Northern Ireland and Irish Republic, were jeopardized by the backstop agreement, and it would affect the relationship between the Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. Repeated assurances have been given by British prime ministers, including Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, and there has been a Windsor framework which has been signed recently, that in a bid to solve years of wrangling about how to ease trade rules between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic without the need for a hard border, which could risk a peace in this province. Biden endorses this Windsor framework and has promised, he's put his money where his mouth is, and he's promised an aid of about $6 billion to ease the birth pangs of this Windsor framework. And if the Irish people are willing to keep intact what was agreed, Good Friday Agreement is preserved and strengthened, the aid would come from America, and a lot of the discomfort caused by Brexit would be undone. Now, the interesting part is this, that as we mentioned earlier, regardless of Biden's personal ties in Ireland, the younger generation in Ireland, both parts of Ireland, has only hazy memories of the Good Friday Agreement, which was signed 25 years back. So the violence of Sinn Féin in the IRA of that vintage has been given up, but a new breed of young disgruntled youngsters is there, who again are removing the scar tissue, and occasional incidents of violence have taken place. Protests took place even during the visit of the US president, despite strong security arrangements. And the presence of the British Prime Minister, who for protocol reasons was there, was also resented. There was a speculation that the US president had given a very cursory handshake to Rishi Sunak and started talking to others around him. But the emotionally charged statements made by Biden do give the hope to the Irish people that the US president will not blindly follow the advice or the concerns, give serious attention to the concerns of the British Prime Minister, which has other problems, and his personal connect might help resolve the crisis, or at least reduce the tempers by a brief respite. We must remember that this tour of Ireland was the longest ever by a sitting US president. It allowed Biden an opportunity to indulge in a lot of light-hearted banter and also project himself as a dynamic diplomat, a person fit to recontest elections once again. So once we come to this, you have enough food for thought. You can think about Trump, you can think about Macron and China and India, and you can think about Ireland and Do we have a relationship with Ireland? Do we have a relationship with other parts, constituent parts of the United Kingdom like Wales and Scotland, which might have opportunity for Indian business, Indian students, Indian professionals? Or are we still stuck in a time warp where England is what is the heart of action for us, whether it is academic, artistic, or elsewhere? How does India gear its diplomacy towards European Union will also be to a large extent impacted by what European Union's relationship with China are and the West are. So this is all we have for you this time. Mull over these things. And if you have any questions, we said the last time, please use the comments column to ask questions, and we shall be happy to answer questions individually to the best of our abilities. But the request and the caveat, like last time, is that please ask questions about the lectures and the topics covered which you have heard. Do not have a wish list about the whole of the course and from alpha to omega of international relations, history, background of Cold War, India's foreign policy. We promise to do that for you subsequently in another set of lectures. So thank you and goodbye till we meet again.